Most people who do extraordinary things do not do them in order to be seen. They do them because the situation in front of them requires it, and because they are the kind of person who responds to a situation with what it needs rather than with what is convenient. They do not do a calculation first. They do not think about whether it will be noticed or rewarded or talked about later. They just do the thing. And then they go home and they wake up the next morning and they do it again. That quiet, unwitnessed consistency is the hardest kind of goodness to sustain, because it does not come with applause or recognition or any of the external signals that tell a person they are doing something right. It just comes with the knowledge that the kids in front of you showed up today with something they did not have yesterday, and that you made that possible, and that this will have to be enough. For most teachers in this country, that is exactly what it is. It is enough, and it is also never quite enough, and they keep going anyway. This is the story of one of those teachers. Her name is Angela Booker. She taught 5th grade at an elementary school in Birmingham, Alabama for 11 years. And on a Tuesday morning in October, she sold her car. Before we tell you why and what happened when Steve Harvey found out, we want to ask you something. Has a teacher ever done something for you? Something beyond what the job required? Something that cost them something that you have never forgotten? Drop it in the comments right now. Because this channel is full of people who have a teacher story, and today we want to hear yours. And if you believe that the people who shape our children deserve more than they are given, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because that is the conversation we are built on every single week. Angela Booker grew up in Tuscaloosa, the daughter of a postal worker and a licensed practical nurse. She was, by her own account, an unremarkable student in the sense that she did not stand out academically the way that people often expect teachers to have stood out. She was not the valedictorian. She did not win the spelling bee. She did not have a singular moment of academic brilliance that pointed clearly toward a future in education. What she had was attention. She paid attention to people. She noticed from a very young age when someone in a room was struggling, not always in the dramatic, obvious way, but in the quiet, specific way of a child who has learned to look smaller because looking smaller feels safer. She noticed which kids ate lunch fast and alone. She noticed which kids came to school in the same clothes 3 days in a row. She noticed which kids flinched at loud noises, and which kids could not sit still, and which kids were working 3 times as hard as everyone else just to keep up, and doing it without complaint because they had already learned that complaining did not change anything. She noticed all of that. She decided, somewhere in the middle of her own schooling, that noticing was not enough, and that she wanted to do something with what she saw. She became a teacher. She taught 5th grade at Westfield Elementary in the Ensley neighborhood of Birmingham for 11 years. Ensley is the kind of neighborhood that people who live outside of it describe with statistics: the median household income, the percentage of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch, the test score averages, the numbers that get cited in policy documents and grant applications and news articles that are trying to explain what it is like to grow up there without having grown up there. People who live inside Ensley describe it with names. The names of their neighbors, the names of the churches, the names of the corner store owners, the names of the families who have been there for 3 generations, and the names of the families who just arrived and are trying to figure out how to make it work. Angela knew the names, not as a performance of community investment, but as the natural outcome of being somewhere long enough and paying close enough attention. She had been teaching the children of Ensley for 11 years, which meant she had watched some of her former students grow up, finish high school, get jobs, have children of their own. Several of those children had ended up in her classroom, which is a particular kind of continuity that only happens when a teacher stays and stays and stays. She had been to graduations and funerals. She had written college recommendation letters and attended court dates, not as a requirement listed anywhere in her contract, but as a requirement of her own understanding of what being genuinely in relationship with a community actually demanded from a person. The school year in question started like most school years at Westfield, with insufficient supplies, overcrowded classrooms, and the particular brand of institutional optimism that teachers are required to maintain in August regardless of what they know is coming. Angela's class that year had 26 students. 8 of them were reading significantly below grade level. 4 had IEPs, individual education plans, that specified accommodations and support that the school was legally required to provide and practically struggling to deliver, because the support staff was stretched thin across the building. 3 of her students were in the foster care system. Two were living in situations that Angela knew about, but that existed in the particular category of things a teacher knows and cannot always act on directly, the category that requires a specific kind of carrying, holding the knowledge, staying alert, building enough of a relationship with the child that they know the door is open if they need it. Angela carried all of that. She carried it in the way that experienced teachers carry these things, which is to say with a professional competence that looks from the outside like calm, but is on the inside a continuous act of management and love and will. The specific situation that led to the car began in September, about 3 weeks into the school year. Angela had been planning a 3-day outdoor education trip for her class, a program run by a nonprofit that took urban students to a nature center outside of Birmingham for environmental science activities, team-building exercises, and the simple, significant experience of being in a natural space that most of these children had never had access to. The program cost $85 per student. The school had allocated partial funding, which brought the cost down to $40 per family. For most of Angela's students' families, $40 was manageable with some notice and some planning. For 8 of them, it was not. Angela knew this before she sent the permission slips home. She had been teaching these families long enough to know which conversations the $40 slip would start at the kitchen table, and what those conversations would cost the parents who had them, and what it would cost the children who overheard them. She had a small supply fund she kept. Teachers across the country maintain these informal emergency funds, contributing their own money month by month to cover the gaps the budget does not reach. But it was already depleted from the beginning of the year. She had spent it on notebooks, on pencils, on the particular brand of granola bar that one student needed because her home situation meant she sometimes arrived at school not having eaten, and this brand was the one she would actually accept without feeling singled out. So Angela did what she had done before in smaller ways. She looked at what she had, and she figured out what she could do without. She looked at her savings, which were modest in the way that a teacher's savings after 11 years in a system that starts at around $38,000 a year tend to be modest. She looked at her car, a 2014 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it that she had owned for 6 years and paid off 2 years ago. She lived 4 miles from the school. The city bus ran a route that passed within 2 blocks of both her apartment and the school entrance. She ran the numbers. She sold the car for $7,200. She used the first $320 to cover the remaining trip costs for the 8 students whose families could not pay. She put the rest in a dedicated account she set up specifically for her class, for field trips, for supplies, for the things that came up across a school year that she had learned to anticipate even when she could not predict exactly what form they would take. She did not tell anyone at the school what she had done. She did not tell her department head or her principal. She told her sister, who called her crazy in the specific, affectionate way that sisters call each other crazy when they know the thing is not crazy at all, but is instead completely characteristic, and they do not know what else to say about it. She took the bus to school the next morning. The story came out the way these stories come out, not through Angela, but through the edges of the situation. A parent whose child was one of the 8 sent Angela a text after the permission slips went back in. "I heard you helped with the cost. Thank you. I don't know how you keep doing this." Angela replied that it was nothing, which it was not, and the parent showed the text to a neighbor who mentioned it to someone at her church who happened to know a local journalist who covered education for a Birmingham news outlet. The journalist called Angela and asked if she could write about it. Angela said she would prefer that she had not done it to be written about. The journalist said she understood, and she meant it, and she also understood that there was a story here that was larger than Angela's individual act, a story about what teachers in under-resourced schools were being required to give of themselves in order to close the gaps that the system was not closing. She asked Angela if she could write the broader story without Angela's name. Angela thought about it. She said yes to that version. The story ran on a Thursday. By Friday, Angela's name was in it anyway, because 3 of the parents had been quoted, and their quotes made it impossible to tell the story without her name, and she had given permission for that without fully thinking through what it meant. The local story was picked up by 2 national education publications. Then a clip of a brief interview Angela gave to a local TV station ran on social media and reached a producer at the Steve Harvey show within 48 hours of being posted. The producer watched the whole interview, which was about 4 minutes long, and in which Angela said, in the specific measured tone of someone who is deeply uncomfortable with the attention, but has decided that if the attention is going to happen, it should at least say the right things, that she had not sold the car as a sacrifice. She said, "I sold it because the math worked out that I could. That is not sacrifice. That is just doing the arithmetic." The producer called the station. The producer got Angela's contact information. Angela took 3 days to return the call, during which time she asked 2 colleagues and her sister whether she should do it, and all 3 said yes, and she said she was not sure, and they said she should still do it, and eventually she did. She arrived at the taping in a lift, which she mentioned to no one, and which Steve Harvey found out about afterward from the production assistant who had arranged her transportation and mentioned it in passing. Angela sat in the green room, which she described later to her sister as the nicest room I have ever been uncomfortable in. And she went through the standard pre-show preparation with a quiet, cooperative energy that the production team noted was unusual. Most guests were either visibly nervous or visibly excited, and Angela was neither. She was the way she probably was at the beginning of every school day. Present, prepared, ready for whatever the next thing was going to be, and determined to handle it with some dignity. When she walked out onto the stage and the audience responded to her, she looked briefly startled and then composed herself in about 2 seconds, the way people who are accustomed to managing a room full of children compose themselves, quickly and without drawing attention to the composing. Steve Harvey greeted her the way he greets people when he is genuinely interested rather than professionally interested, which is a distinction that people who watch him regularly learn to recognize. He leaned forward. He asked about the kids first, not about the car. He asked her what the trip had been like, the outdoor education trip, the thing the car had been sold for. Angela lit up for the first time since she had sat down. She said, "One of my students had never seen a creek before." She is 10 years old and she lives 45 minutes from one of the most beautiful creek systems in Alabama, and she had never seen it. And when she did, she just stood there. She did not say anything for a long time. And then she turned around and looked at me and said, "Miss Booker, it is moving," like she needed to tell someone. Angela stopped. She pressed her lips together. She said, "That is the whole job, right there. That is what I sold the car for." Steve Harvey looked at her for a moment. He said, "I want to make sure I understand something. You sold your car so that child could see a creek." Angela said, "I sold my car so all 26 of them could have the same experience. The creek was just the one that got to her first." Steve turned to address the audience. He said, "I want you to think about something for a second. The average teacher in this country earns around $55,000 a year depending on the state. And that is before taxes, and that is often in places where the cost of living has not stood still while the salary did. They spend, according to most studies, between $300 and $800 of their own money every year on classroom supplies. Pencils, paper, books, snacks for kids who come in hungry, the specific things the budget does not cover and the child cannot go without. They work evenings grading. They work weekends planning. They work summers training and preparing and thinking about the class that is coming in September and the students they already know need something specific. They carry the weight of 20, 25, 30 kids' individual situations alongside everything else in their own lives. And some of them, teachers like Angela, go further than all of that. They look at what they have and they give it, not because anyone asked, not because there is a policy, not because anyone is watching. Because there is a child in front of them who needs something and they have the thing that child needs and they cannot look at that situation and do nothing. He paused. He let that sit. He said, "That is not ordinary generosity. That is a specific, costly, remarkable kind of love. And it does not have a proper name in most of our public conversations about education, which is one of the many things wrong with those conversations. Because without it, without the Angela Bookers, in classrooms all over this country, quietly doing the arithmetic, a lot of children would fall through gaps that no official system is positioned to catch them in." The audience was completely quiet. Angela was looking at her hands in her lap. Then Steve Harvey did what the show's producers had arranged in the days before the taping, but what he delivered in the room with the specific warmth of a man who understood exactly what the gesture meant and was not going to rush through it. He told Angela that a number of people had reached out after her story ran, educators, parents, people who had once been the student in a classroom like hers, people who had once been the teacher in a situation like hers. He said that collectively those people had put together something, not a check, not a single transaction, a structure. The first piece was a new car, a 2024 Honda Civic, the same model she had sold because someone on the production team had found out what she drove and thought the symmetry mattered. The audience responded. Angela did not immediately. She sat very still for a moment, then she said, "You did not have to do that." Steve said, "We know, that is why we did it." The second piece was a classroom fund. $25,000 directed specifically to Angela's classroom account, contributed by a coalition of education advocacy organizations and individual donors, unrestricted and available for whatever the class needed across the next 3 years. Angela's expression shifted in the way that expressions shift when a number is large enough that the mind needs a moment to work out what it actually means in practical terms. She said, 3 years. Steve said, 3 years, she said. That covers a lot of creeks. The audience laughed. Steve laughed. Angela, for the first time all afternoon, fully laughed. The third piece was one that Steve delivered last and quietly because it was the one that mattered most, and he understood that. He said that the nonprofit that ran the outdoor education program had been contacted, and that in Angela's name, a full scholarship fund had been established that would cover the program cost for every student in her class for as long as she continued teaching. Not just this year's class, every year going forward. Angela was quiet for a long moment. She said, "Every year," Steve said. "Every year," she said. "So no child in my class ever has to." She stopped. She tried again. She said, "So the $40 is never the reason again." Steve said, "The $40 is never the reason again." That was the moment the audience stood up. Angela did not stand. She sat in the chair and she put both hands over her face and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just been said, which was not just about the money or the car or the scholarship fund. It was about the fact that someone had seen the problem she had been quietly solving for 11 years and had decided to solve it properly, structurally, so that she would not have to keep reaching into her own life to fill the gap. That is a different kind of gift than a new car. That is the gift of not having to anymore. What happened after the taping followed the pattern that these stories follow when they are real, not a single dramatic change, but a slow accumulation of consequence that spreads outward from the original moment in ways that are hard to fully map. Angela drove the new car home. She called her sister. Her sister cried. Angela said she did not cry until she was alone in the car in the parking lot of her apartment complex, with the engine off. And she said she sat there for a while for reasons she found hard to explain, except that it had something to do with the specific relief of not having to figure out the bus schedule anymore, which sounds small, and was not small at all. She went to school the next morning, and she did not tell her students about the taping, because the taping was not something that had happened for them to know about. It had happened so that the next field trip and the one after that and the one after that could happen without her solving the equation at personal cost. She would tell them about the Creek Scholarship when the next trip came around. That was enough. The story had ripple effects that Angela did not anticipate and did not seek. 3 teachers from other schools in the Birmingham district reached out to her in the weeks after the taping, not to congratulate her, but to talk. To tell her about the informal supply funds they maintained, the monthly contributions they made to cover the gaps, the ways those funds were constantly depleted and replenished and depleted again. The exhaustion of being the gap filler in a system that knows the gaps exist and does not close them. Angela said those conversations were the most meaningful thing that came out of the whole experience. Not the car, not the scholarship fund, but the discovery that there were dozens of teachers doing the same quiet arithmetic she had been doing and feeling alone in it. A local education nonprofit used the attention around her story to launch a teacher emergency fund that would allow other educators in the district to apply for small grants when they were covering classroom costs out of pocket. A school board member cited Angela's situation directly in a budget meeting 3 months after the taping when arguing for an increase in per classroom supply allocations. And while the increase that resulted was smaller than what had been requested, it was the first increase in 4 years. These are the kinds of outcomes that do not fit neatly into a segment or a headline, but are the actual texture of what happens when one story lands in the right place at the right time and reaches the people who have the capacity to do something with what it shows them. Angela is still teaching at Westfield Elementary. She is in her 13th year. She still knows the names of her current students, and of the ones who have moved on and the ones who come back, sometimes to tell her something or ask her something or just to show her who they turned out to be. She took her current class on the outdoor education trip in the spring. All 26 of them went, for the first time in the program's history at her school, with no family paying out of pocket and no teacher selling anything to make it work. She said that when they arrived at the nature center and the students filed off the bus and saw the creek for the first time, she watched their faces the way she always watches their faces at moments like this. Looking for the one that gets there first, the one that has the clearest reaction, the one that will tell her something about what this experience means to a child who has not had it before. This year it was a boy named Deshaun, age 10, who stood at the edge of the water for a long moment and then looked up and said, "Miss Booker, how come nobody brought us here before?" She said she did not have a good answer for that. She said she told him, "We are here now." He nodded like that was sufficient. They walked along the creek for an hour. She thought about the previous year's class. She thought about the girl who had said it is moving. She thought about what it cost and what it was worth, and what the difference between those two things really means when you are standing at a creek in Alabama with 26 10-year-olds who are seeing something new for the first time and will carry it with them for the rest of their lives. Here is the thing about Angela Booker's story that is worth sitting with after everything else has been said. She did not sell her car because she had been asked to. She did not do it because a policy required it or a supervisor suggested it or a community campaign made it the thing to do. She did it alone, quietly, after doing arithmetic on a Tuesday because the gap was there and she had what it took to close it and she could not look at the gap and let it stay open. That is a character. That is a person who was built a certain way. And those people exist in schools all over this country right now. Teachers who are solving the same equation. Teachers who are reaching into their own lives to cover what the budget does not cover. Teachers who are doing it without being seen or rewarded or thanked by anyone except a parent's text message that says, "I do not know how you keep doing this." This story does not fix that system. One car and one scholarship fund and one show segment does not fix a structural problem that has been accumulating for decades. But it does something else. It names the problem in a room full of people and asks them to look at it. And sometimes naming is the beginning of the thing that comes after naming. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of a teacher who did something for you that they did not have to do, something that cost them something, something you have never fully thanked them for, go thank them. Look them up. Send a letter. Make a call. Do the thing you have been meaning to do since the 5th grade when someone decided you were worth the extra effort and never made you feel like it was extra. Share this video so that more people find their way to it. Like it so that the stories of people who give quietly and without applause reach the people who need to hear them. And subscribe to this channel because every single week we bring you the story of someone who saw a gap, did the arithmetic, and decided to close it. We will be here.